The Bird Hospital by Crowninshield Bascom. Dedicated to my lifelong friend, Hannah Gould Mineverse, with the love of Crowninshield Bascom. Preface. The study of birds, and a most delightful study too, is steadily on the increase, and a great deal of good is being done. A great deal more might be done if older people would take more pains in impressing upon all children never to harm in any way our feathered friends. I have prepared this little book of simple true tales, not for the literary critic to pull to pieces, but simply to give pleasure to all lovers of pets, hoping it may be of some help to those who wish to tame and train their own birds or cats. I especially wanted to teach children to love and be kind to all living creatures God has put upon the earth. He has never put anything here that has not some use, no matter how some may fear and hate the lower animals. Never hurt anything, and only kill when it is necessary, and then do it in the quickest and most humane way. I shall be glad to hear from any children who have pets, and will aid them all I can in taming and training them. Crowninshield Bascom. Chapter 1. Little Billy. I have always been passionately fond of animals, and would like to make pets of them all. During the winter I keep a free lunch counter on my bedroom windowsill for all my little friends the English sparrows. Often there will be 24 partaking in the crumbs at the same time, no two looking alike, and making one think of a bootblack spread in New York. Their table manners are not always the best, I am sorry to say, and there is often a great deal of coughing, scratching, and angry words. When the first warm days of spring come, they all say bonjour, but the cold days of autumn bring them back in full force, and it is like welcoming old friends. During the summer I keep a hospital, and have had some very curious cases. The children bring in to me all of the stray birds they find or take away from cats. Often I have 10 at a time. Some die from want of food when I cannot make them eat, but more often from wounds received by cats or boys. It is heartrending to have brought to me a handsome pair of robins all torn to pieces, and feel there is nothing I can do to save their lives, when I know their babies in the nest will be crying for food and will soon die from starvation. My hospital really opened one June, by my mother picking up off the sidewalk a little brown bird which could not have been more than 2 weeks old. I had been ill many months, and my mother and friends had done all they could to make the days pass as quickly as possible for me. So when my mother saw the little orphan, she put him in her handkerchief and brought him to my room, thinking it might amuse me, and I took him inside the bed. After an hour he seemed very happy and not at all afraid. I looked him over carefully, but found him uninjured. I took him to an open window, expecting to see him try to fly away, but he did not seem to have the slightest intention of doing so. The first day I could not get him to eat anything until night, when he drank milk from an after-dinner coffee spoon. After that, he took little pieces of bread soaked in milk from my tongue or lips. I fed him in that way for several days, then he would take it out of my fingers. He lived on bread and milk for 2 weeks. After that, he ate anything I did, all kinds of vegetables, mushrooms, and ice cream. He liked to sit on my shoulder and take his food off my fork. I had some kind of nourishment every 2 hours, and little Billy knew very well when my maid came to my room with the salver that there was something on it to eat or drink, and he was wild until he could get on my hand or shoulder. He drank milk from my tumbler, and would not drink water out of anything but my medicine glass. When little Billy would see me sit down in the morning with an orange on a plate, he'd fly upon his cage, then over into my lap, and sit on the first finger of my left hand, and eat the orange from my spoon. At first he could not crack his own seeds, and as he was very fond of them, I used to do it for him. Later he could crack them himself, but preferred eating them outside his cage, and his hemp seed he would always bring over and eat on the rug in front of my bed. He was very fond of little orange blossom biscuit. I kept some in a tin box under a table by the side of my bed. For several days, every time I would reach out of bed and tap on the box, little Billy would come running for a piece. One day I was visiting with a friend, and we forgot all about the bird. Soon we heard rap, tap, tap, peep, peep, and there was little Billy, standing by the box waiting for a piece. After that he would come many times a day. If I sent him away with a small piece, he would return directly for a large one. I had quite a time teaching him to stay in his cage. The first day I put him in, I was afraid he would die of fright, and I left the cage on the floor for 2 days before he ventured in. After he had been going in and out for some time, I closed the door, but he was frightened quite as much as at first, and he would not go near the cage the rest of the day. Finally, I tried taking the cage on my lap and shutting him in. He did not seem afraid then, and he did not mind being shut up in the morning when I was in my dressing room, but he much preferred going in and out at his own sweet will. If I left him shut up in his cage and went back to bed, he was frantic until he was let out, and then would get in bed with me. For the first 2 weeks he was not happy if he was not on me somewhere. He would stay in bed with me for hours at a time, but when he became more accustomed to the house, he would play on the floor with a little piece of paper, cotton, or a ribbon, and eat his seeds and biscuit. I dressed my hair high, and it was little Billy's special delight to sit on top of my twist while I walked about my room. During the first few weeks, if I put him on the floor when he had been in bed with me, he would hop back and forth on the rug in front of my bed and beg to be taken, as he could not fly straight up. I would put down my hand, he would hop upon my finger, and in a second be back inside the bed. If I was sitting in a chair and put him down on the floor, he would climb right up from my feet to my neck, put his little bill in my mouth, and chirp with glee. One day he was on the floor and did not see me go back to bed, but saw my wrapper over a chair which stood about a yard from my bed. He supposed I was inside of it, but when he reached the top and found no mouth to put his bill into, he gave several very mournful peeps. But as soon as I spoke to him, he chirped, and it did not take him long to fly over to me. The next day when I put him down on the floor, I was anxious to see what he would do. After teasing for some time for me to take him, he went to the chair, climbed up on the wrapper until he reached the top, then flew over to me. Ever after he came that way when I refused to take him. One day I left little Billy on a rug in front of my bed and went into my dressing room. While I was gone, my mother came in and sat down. He was much frightened. Every time she spoke to him, he ran under the bed, stuck his little head out from under the valance, and peeped for me to come to him. When I spoke, he answered, but he was too much afraid to pass mother to come to me. When I came out, he ran quickly to me and flew onto the back of a very low chair. I bent down and he flew up on my shoulder, chirping as loud as he could. No little child could have shown more joy in getting back to its mother. I do not suppose he remembered any other mother, and thought all little birds have just such good mothers as I. I have a magnificent big tiger cat named Taffy, so I thought little Billy would be a very good name for my wee bird. It seemed a very appropriate name too, as he spent a great deal of his time dressing himself and manicuring his nails. When he would strut about with his head held high, you could plainly see the long coat, high collar, high hat and umbrella, and could easily imagine the original little Billy was before you. But I am sorry to say that Taffy and my little Billy would never go walking arm in arm together. Twice Taffy caught little Billy, but I rescued him from the jaws of death before any harm was done, and I tried my best to get them to live contentedly together. I would not allow little Billy to go out into the hall, for fear he would fly downstairs and be caught by Taffy before anyone could reach him. Before the door into the hall is a small rug, and he thought flying over that a great feat, but when I would say, "Little Billy, come right home," he would return instantly. He went to bed at 8 o'clock in a little basket, which I put on the top of some hanging shelves, so there would be no danger from Taffy in the dark. Taffy slept on my bed every night, and very often on the outside when little Billy was inside, and it seemed like the lion and the lamb lying down together. Little Billy would usually be contented in his basket until 7 o'clock in the morning. Then I'd take him into the bed with me, where he would lie quietly on my arm, neck or palm until I got up at 9. He never peeped unless I spoke to him. Then he would chirp away like a happy child. On fine evenings I'd sit before an open window from 7 until 8 o'clock with little Billy on my finger listening to the birds. When he became sleepy he would tuck his little head under his wing, and in a few minutes crawl into the palm of my hand and go sound asleep. Then he would be ready for his basket. When the hot wave came, I went downstairs at 7 o'clock, shutting him up in his cage. The second night I had hard work to catch him. He ran into the hall and would not come when I called to him. The third night, when he saw me making preparations to dress, he acted like mad. He hopped all around me, put out his tiny wings, and tried to fly onto me, opened his bill but not a sound came out. As I stood in front of my dressing table, he flew to the top of his cage, which stood on the floor, to the back of a chair which was near me, then up to my shoulder, chirping away so merrily that I knew he was saying, "Please take me with you." Of course, after that it is needless to say that I took him downstairs, and he went down every night after, where he remained until 8 o'clock, then was put into his basket, and I heard no more from him until morning. On pleasant mornings I sat on the piazza, and little Billy sat on my hand or played in my lap. When I walked on the sidewalk, little Billy went too, and never offered to fly away, and when the wind blew he held on tight. Sometimes he sang, and always seemed interested in all that was going on about him. Twice little Billy flew out of my window from fright. Once he was on my shoulder when a very small girl with a very large hat came up to him, and away he flew. The next time a large bunch of ferns was brought to me. I thought he would like it, and think it a nice little tree, but I was all the tree he seemed to care for. He was so frightened he flew onto a chair, and as I held up a fern, out of the window he went. Both times when my maid went to look for him, she could not find him until she peeped. Then he answered, and she found him sitting in the grass, waiting to be picked up, and he was delighted to get back to me. Little Billy never went to anyone except my physician, and that was when I had him about a week. He went over to him, hopped all over his shoulder, picked at his collar and tie, and was very friendly. Later he would not even go to him, and I felt sure I was Trilby and his only love. Perhaps the children who read this will think little Billy was an angel bird and too good to live. But I will say right here that he was too bad to die. Like all bright children, sometimes he was very naughty. For instance, when I wanted to lie quietly on my bed in the daytime and little Billy did not, he would play for some time running up on the top of my pillow, then down again, hop on my arm, then under the sheet until he found my hand. Back he would go and do the same thing over again. When he became tired of that, he would sit on my chin and be very loving, kiss me in the mouth and chirp away. When he found I was not going to open my eyes or speak to him, he would peck and bite my eyes, nose, ears, cheeks and lips, and I assure you they were not love bites either. Then again, when he wanted to sit on my shoulder, and I preferred he should sit on my hand, he would fly up every time I took him down and bite hard at my hand. And for such a little bird, he had a very big bite and a very fierce look. He loved to visit my mother in her room, and was very happy walking all over her and on her head, but she was never able to touch him. He seemed to have eyes all over his head, for no matter how careful she was, he always saw the finger. He thoroughly enjoyed my squeezing him in my hand, and kissing him over and over again. No doubt long ere this, my readers have been wondering what kind of a bird little Billy was, but that is a question which has not yet been answered. But I loved little Billy so dearly that it made little difference to me what his nationality was, or whether his ancestors came over in the Mayflower, fought in the American Revolution, or whether, like Topsy, he just growed. It was amusing to see little Billy the first time he heard the piano. One morning 2 friends came to see me, and while one of them played, I lay on the sofa with little Billy, cuddled up on my neck. At first he was very much afraid, and did not know what to make of the music. Soon he became charmed, and craned his little neck way out, opened his bill as if he were drinking in the sound, then reached around, kissed me in the mouth, snuggled down again for a few minutes, and repeated it as long as she played. One morning I saw little Billy lying on the floor before an open window, with his neck stretched out and bill wide open. I thought he was dying, picked him up but found him as lively as ever. When he did the same thing over again, I understood he was taking a sun bath, and from then on he took one every morning. One morning it was quite cold when we came in from our walk, and I sat down in front of the fire with little Billy on my knee. It was amusing to see him put his head on one side, open his bill, and drink in the warm air. For 6 weeks he strongly objected to taking a water bath, and I really suppose he was too young and knew best. I left a little dish for several days on the floor by the side of his cage, but he was very careful not to go near it. One morning everything was very quiet. I on my bed and little Billy playing about the room. Soon he went to the dish, looked in all 4 corners, came back to the first one, put his bill in just a little way, then went the rounds, did it all over again, putting his bill in a little farther and shaking off the water. After debating a long time, he got on the edge of the dish, put his head in until it was all wet, then screwed up all his courage and in he went. Such a droll little figure he cut, standing there with his body and head held as high as he could get them, his wings out just a little, not knowing what to do next. All I could think of was a very timid child going and wading for the first time, with long, thin legs, very short frock, and arms akimbo. His fear soon left him, and he was bathing like an old stager. When he finished, he got out, gave himself 2 or 3 good shakes, then came over to the bed and asked me to take him. I did him up in my handkerchief, but that did not suit him at all. I could not do anything with him until I let him get on my bare back, and covered him with the trimming of my dress. He was soaking wet and shivering like a person, having a hard chill. He kept very still until his feathers were dry enough to be dressed. Such shaking, dressing of feathers and prinking I never saw. When his toilet was made to suit him, he nestled down under my chin, and we both slept for an hour. Every day we went through the same performance after the bath. One day I wanted to do something in my dressing room, so I thought little Billy could take his bath and dry himself. Soon I began to hear very mournful peeps, and I came out to find little Billy soaking wet, standing in front of my bed thinking I was there, and teasing for me to take him. Of course I could not resist such pleading, so to bed we went. I know I completely spoiled him, but he was such a dear no one could help it. Little Billy always took a great interest in my writing, and when I would sit down to my desk, he was always on my shoulder, arm, or hand. His favourite place to sit was on my left hand between my first finger and thumb, as they held my portfolio on my lap, and peck at my paper and pen. One day he took the pen full of ink into his bill, then threw the ink all over my paper. He had great fun too in taking the paper off from the bottom of his cage and carrying it all about the room, and would take it out as fast as I put it in. One day he went into his cage, took the farthest corner of the paper in his bill, backed out, bringing the paper over his head until it was all on the floor, then went over to the opposite corner, took that in his bill, backed off the paper until he came to the end, then went around in a circle like the wind for perhaps a dozen times, with the paper perfectly straight out just like a sail. After a few moments I put the paper back. He took it right out in the same way and did it all over again. Another day he would not come to me when I put down my hand, but ran across the room. After trying for some time to make him mind, I got up and said, "Billy, I am going away and leave you," and started out into the hall. He came chasing after me, and after that would always do it when I told him I was going to leave him. If I went out of my room and told him he must not go, he would sit on a chair by an open window or play about on the floor for an hour. I never think of flying out of the window or going out of the door. I succeeded far beyond my expectations with Taffy and little Billy. It hurt me very much to be obliged to punish Taffy when he would spring at little Billy, as Taffy and I had been devoted to each other for 2 years. Still, I did not want him to kill my baby bird. One day little Billy was sitting on my knee, dressing his feathers and going through all sorts of antics, while Taffy sat a few feet away, gazing at him with longing eyes. I called to my maid to bring Taffy, and hold him on her lap, and then let little Billy peck and bite his paws, ears and nose, and a more astonished cat I never saw. After we let Taffy go, he was found sitting on the cellar stairs in a most dejected way, rubbing his nose with his paw. For several days we did the same thing, until Taffy was afraid at the sight of little Billy. One morning Taffy came to bed with me, and lay on my arm while little Billy sat on my shoulder. Soon Taffy put his chin on my chin, and little Billy came and sat close to my cheek. Finally, Taffy became so sleepy he turned over, went fast asleep, and little Billy hopped down on his back, and we lay that way for some time. Almost every day after that, Taffy would lie on my lap, and little Billy would sit on his head, back, or on my knees, and dress his feathers. One day little Billy had the impertinence, while I had both of them on my lap, to reach out and peck Taffy in the eye. That was a little more than Taffy could endure, and he reached out his paw and struck at him. I could not get little Billy to go near him for over a week, when they became very good friends again. Little Billy enjoyed going down into the parlours to see visitors, but he gave them to understand, the first thing, they might look but not touch. He would entertain them by hopping all over me, kissing me in the mouth, and chirping at the top of his voice. When it began to get dark, little Billy did not want to be off from me for a minute. If I had him downstairs and put him on the floor, he would hop and fly after me from room to room. Once I left him in the front parlour on a plant jar, and went into the dining room, and was gone for some little time. When I came back there was no little Billy to be found. I called him by name and peeped to him, but I could not get an answer. I went upstairs. I called, "Where is my little Billy?" And he said, "Chirp, chirp, chirp." And I found him in my room, eating his seeds and as happy as possible. From then on, whenever he became tired of the parlours, he would go upstairs, for he seemed to think my room his home. One day I watched him to see how he went. He hopped from step to step. When he reached the top, he flew into my room and lighted on the top of his cage. Sometimes he waited for me at the top of the stairs, lying flat down, putting his head out just as a dog does between his paws. Little Billy certainly was not colourblind, for he noticed every little change in my dress, no matter how slight it was. He had seen me for weeks in only my robe de nuit and wrapper. It was pitiable to see him the first time he saw me gowned in a white skirt and blue waist. I had to lie down when I had finished dressing, and little Billy came over to the bed as usual and asked me to take him. I put down my hand, and he hopped on my finger, but when he looked up and saw the blue sleeve, away he went as if he had been shot out of a cannon. He tried several times, but his courage always failed. At last he gave up, and went and sat in a chair across the room, and it was 2 days before he really liked the change. Next I tried a pink waist with the white skirt, but that seemed even worse to him, which seemed very strange, as he had seen me for days in a pink and white wrapper. One morning in November I was trying my strength by doing a little dusting, after getting little Billy's cage ready for the day. He was unusually happy and lively, but thought it was high time we went back to bed, so kept flying from the top of his cage, which was near me, to the bed and back again, teasing me to go with him. He was always afraid of anything white, and not thinking as he flew back to me, I picked up my large cheesecloth duster by one end and spread the rest out like a flag. The window and blinds were wide open, and to get out of the way of the cloth he flew out the window, probably not having the least idea where he was going. I called out to our maid to run across the street and look for him, thinking he had gone that way. After she had looked an hour, we were told of a little brown bird that had been seen in the next yard, sitting in the dry leaves. They said he seemed very tame, and looked as if he expected someone to come and pick him up. We were positive it was our lost pet, but we could not find any further trace of him. That night it grew very cold, and rained hard until morning, and we have not a doubt that he perished, as he had always been used to his nice warm basket. For days we were a very sad household, and many tears were shed.